The sun was sinking low, painting the horizon in shades of orange and gold, while Ezekiel moved steadily through his rows of crops. His hands, roughened by years of labor, brushed gently against the stalks as if they were his children. Every plant mattered, not just because it kept his farm alive, but because it fed the people around him. Ezekiel was known in town for giving away what he could, bags of corn left on porches, baskets of tomatoes delivered to the shelter, always with a quiet smile. To him, farming was more than survival, it was service. As the light dimmed, the comforting sounds of crickets and rustling leaves were interrupted by the growl of engines. Headlights cut through the dark, glaring across his fields. Ezekiel straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, his heart tightening with unease. A group of men spilled from their trucks, their laughter sharp, their movements heavy with malice. They weren't here to buy food. They weren't here to help. They circled him, jeers flying like stones. Ezekiel stood tall, though his chest tightened. He had faced danger before, in deserts and seas far away, but this felt different. These were neighbors, people who knew his name, and yet they came with fists, boots, and rage. His tools were knocked from his hands, his carefully tended rows stomped into the dirt. The land he had nurtured was under assault, and with each blow he endured, he felt not just his body but his very spirit being tested. Curled against the side of his farmhouse, Ezekiel struggled to catch his breath. The pain in his ribs was sharp, each inhale a reminder of what had just happened. His fields lay scattered and broken, stalks bent beneath careless boots. For a moment, a deep weariness pressed down on him, the kind that makes a man wonder if all his work, all his giving, had ever mattered. But Ezekiel was not a man who stayed down for long. With trembling fingers, he pulled his phone from his pocket. He could have dialed the police. He could have called a neighbor. Yet, as the screen lit up, his thumb hovered over a number he hadn't touched in years. Memories rushed back, the desert sun, the crash of waves, the sound of his brothers' voices carried through the chaos of war. These were men who had seen him at his strongest and his weakest, men who had trusted him with their lives as he had trusted them with his. The line rang once before a gruff voice answered, steady and familiar. Ezekiel didn't have to explain much. His voice cracked, but the silence on the other end wasn't judgment, it was understanding. Then came the words he needed most, spoken without hesitation, "We're on our way, brother." For the first time that night, Ezekiel felt the weight in his chest ease. He was still bruised, still alone in the dark, but hope had already begun its quiet return, carried on the promise of men who never forgot him. The night had grown deep and still by the time Ezekiel heard the crunch of tires on gravel. This time, the sound didn't bring dread. From the shadows emerged figures he knew as well as his own reflection, broad shoulders, steady strides, eyes that had seen both war and brotherhood. His old Navy SEAL squad had come, not with weapons drawn, but with the quiet confidence of men who had faced storms together. One by one, they clasped his hand, pulled him into brief embraces, and stood beside him as though no years had passed at all. When the gang returned, loud and reckless, expecting an easy target, they froze at the sight before them. Ezekiel was no longer a lone farmer bent under their cruelty, he was surrounded by a wall of unshakable strength. The veterans didn't raise fists or shout threats, they simply stood, their silence carrying more weight than anger ever could. The gang's jeers faltered, unease rippling through their bravado. Ezekiel's brothers in arms formed a circle around him, their posture calm yet unyielding. They didn't need to fight, the very presence of their unity was enough. It was a living reminder that true strength was never in numbers or noise, but in loyalty and love that time could not erode. For the first time that night, the balance shifted. The men who had come to break him now stood uncertain, staring at a farmer who was no longer alone but backed by a bond forged stronger than steel. The air hung heavy, tense enough to break. The gang shifted uneasily, their swagger fading in the face of a silence that seemed louder than any threat. Then, one of the veterans, broad-shouldered, his voice steady as stone, stepped forward. He didn't speak with anger, nor did he challenge them with force. Instead, his words cut through the night with a calm clarity. Why tear down a man who's feeding your community, when you could stand beside him? The question hung there, sharper than fists, heavier than shame. The gang looked at one another, their bravado crumbling as the truth sank in. Ezekiel, bruised and weary, stood with his head bowed, but his presence was unbroken. He had been struck down, yet here he was, still offering life through the work of his hands, even to those who sought to harm him. One young man in the group couldn't hold the weight of those words. His eyes darted to the ruined rows of crops, to Ezekiel's bloodied face, to the unyielding men who stood not in vengeance, but in defense of kindness. Something inside him cracked. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he stepped forward. His voice faltered as he whispered, I didn't know. I didn't think. And then, in a moment that stunned even his own companions, he reached down, offering Ezekiel his hand. The farmer looked up, surprised, and for the first time that night, there was no hatred in the boy's eyes, only regret, and the faintest spark of change. Weeks later, the land bore no trace of the violence that had scarred it. Rows of green stretched proudly beneath the summer sun, the soil freshly tilled and alive again. Ezekiel moved through the fields as he always had, his steady hands guiding new growth from the earth. But this time, he was not alone. Neighbors, once distant, now walked beside him, carrying baskets, tools, and laughter. The same young man who had struck him now knelt in the dirt, planting seedlings with a care that spoke louder than any apology. His shoulders, once hunched with anger, now bent in service, his hands steady as if trying to mend what he had once destroyed. From the farmhouse porch, Ezekiel's old squad watched quietly. They didn't need recognition, they had come and done what mattered most, not by fighting, but by reminding everyone of the power of standing together. They shared quiet smiles, proud not of the show of strength but of the transformation they had witnessed take root. As the day drew to a close, Ezekiel gathered a basket of ripe vegetables and handed it to the young man. Their eyes met, and without words, the exchange carried forgiveness, hope, and a new beginning. The farm had become more than a place of work, it was now a place of healing, of second chances. And as the community came together in the golden light, one truth shone brighter than the harvest: sometimes the strongest act of all is kindness, powerful enough to change a heart forever.